Gee, Smalls. I suppose you don't even know who the babe is either. It's Plug. What? Chewing tobacco?
Backy, man.
What do you do with it? You're killing me, Smalls.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time to do another comic book creator retrospective. We're going with a pretty big name here, Roy Thomas, the protege of Stan Lee and its successor as editor-in-chief. Now, his career is so prolific, we're not going to be able to, we'll cover the highlights, and that won't even be enough because the man is literally, the breadth of work was just overwhelming when I was doing some research for this one. Obviously, here with me to talk about this are my two good friends, award-winning comic book editor Joe Corallo, obviously writer as well. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you? I'm
fantastic. We've also got the voice of the voiceless, the man so cool they call him the breed. He's also a voice talent on some type of reading program on the weekends, right, Breed?
Yeah, we'll go with talent.
What's the show? Where can people find it? They want to hear you doing a read through on a comic book.
We do it Friday nights on I Love Comics, where we take a first appearance of a character and we will read the comic and we put our own little spin on it.
Yeah, so if you want to hear the voice talents of Eric Breed, definitely go check that one out. Angletine's a good guy over at I Love Comics, so definitely.
I always get the gruff voices. I don't know why.
He's always a little guy. So interesting start out in the comic book industry here, Breed. It turns out that Roy Thomas has accepted a fellowship at George Washington University, but a couple of days later, he gets an offer to work at DC Comics. This is 1965. So he goes to work for DC, and he's already written some Jimmy Olsen stuff and a few other things while he was in St. Louis at the time. And then 8 days later, he quits DC and goes and works for Marvel. And that pretty much starts his journey there. So obviously, he was a man of many talents. He had three big offers in the span of a couple weeks.
Yeah, and prior to that, he had taken over editing of a fanzine called Alter Ego, which he is still doing today. It was formed by a super fan named Jerry Balls. And 1 year later, he got the job at DC, working for Mort Weisinger. And he realized almost immediately that he wasn't going to like that. So apparently he sent a letter to Stan, not asking for a job, just basically, I guess, saying how much he loved what Marvel was doing. And Stan called him back and offered him a job. And that's how his, the ball got rolling at Marvel. And that led to, he ended up writing X-Men. He succeeded Stan on X-Men, Avengers. And so, he wrote a lot during the second half of the 60s and into the 70s when he eventually became, Stan's successor as editor-in-chief.
Yeah,
it's crazy, Joe. He's just literally written every major important character or team at Marvel Comics.
Oh yeah, it's funny though when you think about it, like he almost could have been Mort Weitsinger's successor, and if you think about it, in a way, Mort Weisinger helped to staff up Marvel both by driving Roy Thomas there and driving Jim Shooter there. So you could say Mort Weisinger helped to create two of the most well-remembered editor-in-chiefs of Marvel Comics. So and everyone's just helping each other.
Then Jim Shooter returned the favor.
Sent all the talent back.
Including Roy.
Yeah, including Roy. Eventually, we'll
get
to that part. So, I mean, Roy's done so much. It's almost like I said, he's working on every major character. The first thing that I think of when I think of Roy Thomas at Marvel is Conan the Barbarian.
Yep.
Now, between Conan the Barbarian, Savage Sword of Conan, they also had, I think, some digests or something like that, some black and white stories there. But launched in 1970 with Barry Windsor Smith, he did hundreds and hundreds of issues of Conan, and they're fantastic. They do a lot of reprints nowadays. And if you have not gone back and read those Marvel Conan with Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith, like, you're doing it wrong, Joe, because those are some of the best epic fantasy comics you're ever going to read.
Oh yeah, I mean, Roy is at least credited to some extent for being so good with Conan of like sparking, you know, a sword and sorcery boom in comics. And I mean,
obviously we got the big movie.
yeah, it helps that he was working with John Buscema, but you know, it didn't hurt. But no, he did a fantastic job with that. And just like early on, like some of the things like I think about in comics are Spider-Man is as popular today as he is because, like, while Stan did all that work, it's because Jerry Conway did such a good job after Stan that, you know, it proved that the character could survive beyond Stan. And in that same way, Roy taking over as editor-in-chief proved that Marvel was strong enough to continue on, and it wasn't just Stan. So, you know, I'm not saying that in a way to diminish Stan. I'm saying that more in a way to talk about the talent that Stan had around him and was able to prop up. You know, he did a good job with that. And what Roy did in his tenure and the decisions he made helped to solidify Marvel as you know, the dominant force in the industry.
Also, I remember you hear the story about Star Wars when they was first presented to Marvel, that George Lucas, you know, they had this movie coming out and they wanted to do a comic book to kind of help promote the movie and what was going to be in it. And a lot of people at Marvel weren't interested, but Roy Thomas, as soon as he saw it, he was like, that is an opportunity. And this is something that I think is going to be big. So he jumped all over it. It ended up being one of their something that was pretty important to Marvel in the late 70s and actually predates the movie by a couple months. You could say Star Wars is a comic book movie, Joe, sort of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jim Salicrup says it's in a way it was like the first Marvel movie because you're a kid, you don't know any better. If you were a kid and you picked up a comic off the rack somewhere and then a movie comes out with the same, you know, title and you go see the movie, it's like it's one half dozen or the other to you. So absolutely, for some people, there's a generation of people out there that it kind of was their first Marvel movie.
And you mentioned, I said that Roy was instrumental in getting Star Wars published.
Yep.
He also had to convince Stan to do Conan.
Mm-hmm.
So on one hand, you know, it's a testament to Stan that he's willing to listen. But you know, two of the biggest properties Marvel ever had were as a result of Roy Thomas's, you know, tenacity and pushing for it until he got it done. And there's a story, and I don't know how much of this is true, but when Roy left to go to DC, he worked out a deal to continue writing Conan with the head of, like, the top guy at Marvel, and I can't remember his name. And yeah, they went to Jim Shooter, you know, who didn't want to let him do it, but and then, you know, they had a meeting. It was Roy Thomas. He brought the head guy from Marvel and Jim Shooter, and Shooter just laid out a bunch of facts for why it wasn't a good idea. And the guy, the head of Marvel, ended up siding with Shooter. And apparently Roy was, you know, incensed by that. And yeah, it might have been why he didn't, you know, go anywhere near Marvel until Shooter was long gone.
Absolutely. But he's also, I think he wrote the first publishing venture between Marvel and DC. They did like a Wizard of Oz adaptation, right?
1975 is about a year before the Superman Spider-Man.
Yeah, this is crazy. The amount of things that he's done that are really just historical in nature.
Well also, he was a big part of helping to diversify Marvel in the 70s. I mean, he was instrumental in pushing that series, The Cat, that was sort of like one of their first, I think it was their first female-led comic with a woman writing it. Linda Fight, who is Herb Trimpe's wife, wrote that series, and I think Marie Severin was the artist on it. And you know, the idea of trying to do that, like, let's get a female superhero with a female creative team, like, that's not new. That's not something that people just thought of in the past few years. That's something that Roy and Stan worked on 50 years ago. And in addition to that, I mean, Roy worked on characters like, Luke Cage, and they had Billy Graham, who was a prolific black inker at the time, work on that book, and also contributed, story ideas, and was involved and instrumental in the book as well. So Roy also has, a history of, thinking not only just on the page, but behind the page, and wanting to do certain things like that several decades before a lot of other people actively and were openly discussing these things.
And what's crazy, Brady? You look at the amount of characters he created at Marvel, or co-created. Obviously, the artist would have been credited with it, but you got Wolverine, Ultron, which included the adamantium metal, Carol Danvers, Morbius, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Ghost Rider, Doc Samson, Valkyrie, Brother Voodoo, Werewolf by Night, Banshee, Killraven, Vision, Yellow Jacket, Black Knight, Adam Warlock. Obviously, the last four were kind of adaptations of already existing characters. That's a hell of a lineup.
Yeah, well, he was there. I mean, he wrote so much, and at the time, you don't give it a second thought. You need a character for a book, so it's for stories, so you create one. And a lot of them have really stood the test of time. And something Joe was mentioning earlier also, when he wrote Red Sonja after the Marvel feature series, he had a female co-writer who I believe did the vast majority of the stories, and Roy just basically lent the plots to them. I wish I could remember her name, but that was another thing that not many people know.
Yeah. And his wife co-wrote with him the Wonder Woman 300, celebration. That was like a sort of a, it was major oversized book. It was like 72 pages, and they tried to get all these different artists who had worked on Wonder Woman before, like Ross Andrew and people like that in the book, as a celebration of Wonder Woman. So, and him co-writing with his wife, that predates Gail Simone working on Wonder Woman, Mindy Newell, and others. Like, he really, he cared enough about that stuff in a way that I don't think a lot of people give him credit for. And I think a lot of people assume otherwise because of when he was working on comics. And it's too bad.
It's weird, Joe. I've done some videos talking about some of the disputes between, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the people that side with Jack Kirby do not have a very high opinion of Roy Thomas. They call him House Roy, and he's basically thought of as just kind of Stan Lee's stooge, or somebody that just kind of was at his beck and call. But I guess everyone has their opinions. What is really interesting about Roy and all of this is he's one of the few people in the moment that realized the things that they were working on were historical, and he kept a lot of this information, and we wouldn't have the factual evidence that we have in a lot of these disputes without somebody like a Roy Thomas actually collecting and keeping this stuff.
Yeah, well, he cares a lot about. He's a big fan of the golden age of comics. He has an imprint through PS Art Books where they collect a bunch of older golden age comics, like Phantom Lady, which I have the 2 volumes he put out of that. The Heap, and Roy Thomas was a fan of the Heap, and was part of the creation process in Man-Thing, which makes you think like, hey, like he was aware, he had that knowledge, and was trying to update and create a new character like that. And let's not also forget that Roy Thomas had a hand in characters like Wolverine and everyone's favorite Carol Danvers.
Absolutely. But he's pretty much a comic historian at this point. Mm-hmm. And thankfully somebody at the moment realized that we needed to keep maybe some of these Marvel way kind of scripts that were being put in that actually can point out the actual facts, things that are happening. Now, mm-hmm. Eric, we've alluded to it. Something happens when Jim Shooter kind of starts taking over between him and Roy, and he essentially leaves, I think in 1981, to go over to DC Comics, who he'd worked for previously for 8 days. What was the deal between him and Jim Shooter? That just two people that couldn't work together, or he didn't like the direction?
Well, Jim Shooter was absolutely steadfast. And, it was his way or no way, and that did rub some people the wrong way. I mean, Wolfman, Perez, Roy Thomas, and it also gave. And Roy had done the Invaders series at Marvel because he's also a huge World War II historian, and going to DC allowed him to do the DC equivalent with the All-Star Squadron. Mm-hmm. And it basically gave him a new toy box to play with for years. And unfortunately for Roy, the Crisis basically undid everything he had done at DC, because the All-Star Squadron, a lot of those characters were no longer to have existed. So that killed that. The Infinity Inc., which was also him, was altered big time because some of the parents of the characters no longer existed, and so that all had to be reshuffled. And as a kind of like an olive branch, they said that they would let him be in charge of their new Secret Origins book. Then they kind of screwed him over on that as well. So that, and he also had the Young All-Stars at DC. And that led him eventually to come back to Marvel, which I believe when he wrote the second half of the West Coast Avengers run. But, Roy's a creative type. Jim Shooter also, understood business and creative, as did Roy. But sometimes personalities just clash. And now,
and he's in the position that he was in before.
And Jim was now doing what Roy had done. Yeah. Now, apparently, they to this day don't get along. Going back to the thing in the Conan thing in 1981. Mm-hmm. But
that's crazy because he did write a letter when he was at DC to Jim Shooter. Basically, let's let bygones be bygones. I would have come back to Marvel. I think it was in 1984, 85 when he returned. But maybe that was just to mend some fences, Joe. And I guess maybe they aren't friends anymore. They're still on.
Yeah, and that's okay. It's those things happen, but
personality clashes happen.
Yeah, but Roy has a history of writing a lot of letters. I believe he had a letter in the first letter column for Fantastic Four. I want to say number 5.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then and he had letters printed throughout. Every. I don't know, 8, 10, 12 issues or whatever, you'd see another Roy Thomas letter pop up. He was a big fan of it and a vocal fan, writing it about this stuff. And he knows the history, and he got to play such a pivotal role through it. We went over the Kree-Skrull War, which, obviously was, worked on by Roy Thomas. Check out that video if you haven't yet. Also, when he was editor, I mean, he's the guy who let Steve Englehart take Captain America and let him do whatever he wanted. And Marvel to this day mines that run probably more than any other run, just in terms of what they do with the character. I mean, it is constantly mined, and even some great stuff that people like Mark Grunwald did, it's still derivative of that run. So, I mean, Roy basically cemented the legacy of Captain America from that time up through today. And he did everything he could to try to get these books out on time. Joe Staten once told a story about how he ended up doing stuff over at Marvel because he just got a call from Roy and was interested in him. I think the first stuff he did there was Avengers stuff. And at a con many years later, Joe asked Roy, he was like, "Oh, what made you call me and want to put me on a book like that, like out of the blue?" Because he hadn't done Marvel work before. I think he was mostly just known for E-Man and his Charleston stuff at the time. And Roy responded like, I don't know. I guess we just needed people that week. Like, it was just like, for him, it was just like, we got to get this done. What do we got to do? Who do we know? And get these books going. So, and that would be something that after he left, during that period of a few years where it was just rotating editors and chiefs, that you'd get some more bumps in the road for a little bit before Jim came along, which I think only probably cemented how Jim approached things. But yeah, Roy cares about the industry, cares about the legacy, cared about the past, and he cared about the future. And I don't think, like, I feel like he's like the quiet ambassador of comics at this point. Like, he's not loud, he's not boisterous, he's not like a carnival barker or anything like that, but he's still an ambassador of comics, and we're lucky we still have him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would argue, I'll go one step better, between what he's done with resurrecting the golden age stories that he collects in those PS Art books, to the Alter Ego magazine, which he, like I said, started editing in 1964 and still has a presence in today, albeit in a different form. His work on Back Issue, the magazine, all the other projects he's done for the Tomorrow's Company. When a question that everybody gets asked at one point or another, who is your Mount Rushmore of comics? And mine is Siegel and Schuster as one, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Roy Thomas. Because there's never been a greater ambassador, to Joe's point, for this hobby than Roy Thomas. That includes Stan, that includes Jack, because I'm not saying that he accomplished more on the printed page than those two, but he cares about preserving this hobby, I think, more than anybody ever has or will. And the proof is all of the things he has, shepherded to get out to fans, and that can't be diminished. Plus, his accomplishments as a writer don't have to take a backseat to very many people.
No, for sure. And I do have a suspicion that the Morbius film that will be out soon is not going to align with exactly what Roy had in mind for the character when he created him. But keep in mind, when you do see that movie, that's Roy Thomas created that or co-created that character with I think it was Gil Kane, right?
Yeah, for a lot of people don't remember, Roy actually wrote 4 issues of Spider-Man in between Stan and Jerry, and in those 4 issues, we got the creation of Morbius.
Yep.
Certainly had an interest in horror themed characters within the Marvel universe. I think the cool thing that people kind of overlook, as we talked about earlier, Joe, is he wasn't scared to take chances as an editor or as a creator. He was, hey, Conan is something that we can adapt at Marvel. Nobody else thought it was a good idea. Turns out it was a great idea. Star Wars, this is something that we should become a part of. They have the start. They fought for that Star Wars license to get it back because it was so important to him. Yep. Later on, when he returned to Marvel after going to DC, he adapted a ton of classic literature into comic books, proving the medium that says this isn't just superheroes, or maybe it's not just detective stories or horror books. You can tell any story within comic books, and you can tell that there are a few people out there that really do love comic books quite as much as Roy Thomas, Joe.
No, absolutely, and he was a student of history, just in general. And he clearly, projected that into other aspects of his life, including comics. And, again, even just his work preserving some Golden Age comics alone is more than almost everyone in comics today, let alone the actual work he has contributed to the medium through his writing and editing.
So did you ever meet him? You like to come out here and tell a little anecdote. Did you meet Roy Thomas?
Him I haven't met.
Oh.
I'm not against it.
You were on a panel once where he was picking his nose?
I certainly
Roy!
have enough stuff here that I'd be more than happy to have him sign, but no, it's never worked out. But.
Eric, do you have any final words about Roy? Obviously, you just talked about being on the Mount Rushmore and stuff.
Only that, yeah, there's not many people in the public eye that I've ever wanted to meet. The old expression, "Don't meet your idols," blah blah blah. I would love to have one chance to talk to Roy Thomas, or just to say thank you, because I said that man has had a fascinating life and a hobby that. Yeah, there aren't a lot of people out there that have been in this hobby longer than me. Roy is certainly one of them by, a lot of years. And I said, I think it'd be fascinating to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said when we began, with the career with that much breadth, we were never going to be able to cover everything. I think we hit a lot of the high notes, a lot of things he created, the changes that he took, the impact that he left with the characters at Marvel and DC, and the very interesting career that he had. And I want to say thank you very much to Joe and Eric. We'll be back next week. I think we're going to be talking about Gil Kane. So the first time we talk about primarily an artist with the career retrospective. That should be fun. And we will see you all next time.
Bye.
Take care.